Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about 5 practical strategies that help me stop overthinking. Now, I have been an overthinker all my life, and overthinking has nearly stopped me from doing lots of things that have ended up being very good for me. Overthinking nearly stopped me from starting my business, from starting my YouTube channel, and from asking my future wife out on our first date. But over the years, I have found strategies that have been actually quite helpful in combating this natural desire that me and I've heard other people have to just overthink the hell out of things. And that's what we're going to talk about in the video. So firstly, let's talk about what is overthinking in the first place. And generally, if you search Wikipedia, overthinking comes under broadly the same category as analysis paralysis. And that's basically where we stop ourselves from doing things because we're in our heads about those things too much, and we are sort of thinking that the more we think about the thing, the more information we're going to get, and that's in theory going to result in a more legit decision than if we just acted sooner rather than later. Now, the opposite of analysis paralysis is extinct by instinct, which is kind of funny, and that's basically the opposite problem, where you're the sort of person that acts too rashly and you don't think of things enough. But usually for me and most people that I know, it tends to be the other way. It's not that we struggle with acting too fast, it's that we struggle with acting too slow because we're just stuck in our heads trying to overthink all the time. So where does overthinking come from and why do we do it? And then I promise we're going to talk about the specific strategies afterwards. But essentially overthinking, there's broadly 2 types of it. There's past overthinking, past event overthinking, and then there's future event overthinking. Now, past event overthinking is when someone has said something or done something or something has happened in our lives, and we like to construct this mental narrative about the thing, and we tell ourselves this elaborate story like, oh, that person sent me this sort of text, and therefore that must mean A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and we construct this ridiculous narrative around it that just serves to make us feel bad, when in reality that person probably didn't even mean it that way, they probably weren't thinking of it in those ways, and we just sort of make ourselves miserable by ascribing all of this different sequence of events to something that could be just completely innocuous. But that's not the kind of overthinking I want to focus on here. I mean, the solution to that is stoicism and CBT and a bunch of other things along that category. I like to think about the future kind of overthinking, where it's analysis paralysis in terms of we want to do a thing in the future, but we find ourselves overthinking about the thing, and then it stops us from actually doing the thing. And I think it's really that kind of overthinking that leads us to not following our dreams and ultimately living a life that we regret because we were in our heads too much, we overanalyzed, and that stopped us from going after the things that we really wanted to. And broadly, the reason that happens is anxiety/fear. Now, I'm going to take a page out of Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart, which defines anxiety and fear in different ways. And I think this is actually quite a helpful definition to appreciate. Basically, what she says is that fear is a response to a threat in the moment. And that threat might be a threat to your survival. So for example, if a lion were to walk into this room right now, I'd feel fear because there is a threat to my survival right now. Whereas anxiety is where I perceive that in the future, there may be a threat to my survival. And so it's worrying about this potential thing that may happen at some point in the future. Now, no one overthinks when it comes to bog standard fear. If a lion came in, I'd run. I wouldn't overthink the hell out of the running. But we all tend to overthink when it comes to the anxiety side of things. When there is some sort of thing in the future where we think that if this thing I'm thinking of doing goes badly, that could be a potentially huge threat to my survival. And generally, it's not really our physical survival. Mostly when we think of overthinking in the modern world, it's not like, oh, I'm really worried I'm going to be jumping off a cliff or something. It tends to be more about social risks. I'm really concerned. I'm overthinking uploading my first YouTube video. I'm overthinking asking that person out on a date because what if they rejected me and what if that would be bad? And the amygdala, which is the part of our brain that deals with fear and threat and stuff, is very, very attuned to social threat. Because back in the day, back in our caveman times, any kind of social threat, if that meant that you got outcast from the group, suddenly that means you're basically dead because now you have no friends to help protect you. And that thing which was adaptive back in the day, that stopped us from taking risks and that caused us to evolve this overthinking mechanism, it's now not particularly helpful in the current world today, where we're still operating in caveman brain mode, where it's like, oh my God, if my friends are going to judge me, that's going to be bad for my survival, when in reality, it's really not. And so recognizing that really overthinking is just when we are scared of something, there's a few different things that I like to keep in mind that help me kind of take action despite my tendency to overthink. The first one is what I call thinking in terms of experiments. And this is a pretty magical thing because I find that for me, whenever I'm overthinking or on the verge of overthinking something, I just tell myself the phrase, hey, it's just an experiment. And there's something about that word experiment that just automatically takes all of the pressure off the decision. If, for example, I was overthinking, which I was, uploading my first couple of videos to my YouTube channel ages ago when I was making musical singing covers, I kind of treated that as a bit of an experiment. Hey, it's just an experiment. I'm not signing up to do this forever. It's just an experiment and I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to see how I feel. And it's like when we're thinking in terms of experiments, we're approaching things not with a sense of wanting things to be a certain way, but we're approaching them with wonder and curiosity. Like, I wonder how I would respond in this kind of situation. I wonder what it would be like to try and film a video of me and my friends singing a song, and I wonder what it would be like for me to edit that video. And that decision I made to run the experiment, essentially, of making music videos on my YouTube channel, like way back in the day, ultimately taught me how to edit videos and helped me get over that first hurdle of putting myself out there on YouTube with my channel 5 years ago when this thing kind of started. So that was thinking in experiments, and I find that that really does help my tendency to overthink things. Secondly, I find it really helpful, again, to avoid overthinking, to think about the idea of expected value. Now, in the world of probability, in the world of gambling, in the world of poker, actually in the world of anything in general, expected value is where you multiply the magnitude of, good or bad with the probability of said good or bad happening. So for example, if I flipped a coin and if it landed heads, I was going to win $100, then the expected value of the coin flip would be $50 because there is a 50% likelihood of winning $100. Now, this concept is super interesting because if you start applying this to your life, then you start thinking in terms of, rather than in terms of, oh my God, like, is this decision going to succeed? If I ask that girl out, is she going to say yes? You're not really concerned about that. All you're trying to do is weigh up, is this plus EV or minus EV? Is it a positive expected value? If I were to do this thing enough times, would I expect that in the long run, I would come out on top? Or would I expect that actually the risks do outweigh the benefits of the thing, and therefore it's negative EV minus expected value? And the cool thing about this is that it removes the kind of pressure on a single decision. And it's not so much of like being wedded to the outcome of a particular decision or a particular course of action. It's more about, hey, it's plus EV. It's worth running the experiment anyway. And it's like, I was interviewing a friend of mine, Chris Sparks, who's a professional poker player. And poker players judge the quality of their decisions, not on the outcome, but on basically the quality of the decision they made based on the information that they had. Was it a good decision? Even if it ended up losing, it still could have been the right decision because you know that if you make enough of those decisions over the long term, you are likely to come out on top. And that's why something like sending a cold email to someone saying you want to grab coffee with them is always plus EV. It's like there's basically zero downside to it. And if you do it enough times, you're probably going to get a response and someone's probably going to say yes to you. Similarly, putting yourself out there on the internet, starting a blog or a podcast or a YouTube channel, these things are generally plus EV. You are very unlikely to experience significant downsides of them. But if they go well, as in the case of this YouTube channel, it's completely changed my life. It's a very plus EV decision, whatever the outcome might be. And so whenever I find myself in this loop of like overthinking stuff and that analysis paralysis stops me from doing anything, I think like, okay, what if I treated this as an experiment? And then what is the EV here? If it's plus EV, I might as well just do the thing and just not worry about the specific outcome too much. Alrighty, tip number 3 is the idea that fear is your compass. I first came across this from my friend Nathaniel Drew, who is a fellow YouTuber. That phrase put a lot of things straight in my mind. Because broadly, what I've realized over the years is that whenever I'm scared of doing something, it's probably the right thing to do. Because really, we're only scared about doing things where we feel uncomfortable in some way. We feel like it's out of our comfort zone. And that is where growth is found. And so if I think back to my life, anytime I've made a decision where I've been scared of it, I've always been glad of it. And whenever I've made a decision which is safer than the option that feels scarier, I've always kind of thought, oh, maybe I should have gone with the more scary option. And so these days, when I'm at a crossroads and I find myself overthinking, one easy heuristic is fear is my compass. Let me go towards the option that scares me more because chances are I'll be able to learn more from that than the option that's more within my comfort zone. Alrighty, tip number 4 for dealing with overthinking is something that I do all the time when it comes to publishing stuff, publishing videos, podcasts, blog posts, like any kind of creative thing, any kind of business thing, which is that I'm allowed to overthink all I want, but it has to be on the foundation of consistent action. So what do I mean by this? I mean, like, I see this problem in my YouTuber Academy all the time. If you don't know, I run a course, I teach people how to be part-time YouTubers. And everyone always really struggles with overthinking the hell out of their YouTube channels because they're always like, oh, I could upload this video, but it's not very good. The production value is not great. The lighting's not great. I don't know how to speak to a camera. I don't know how to edit, etc., etc., etc. And because we teach them a bunch of stuff in the course, they get into this overthinking analysis paralysis mode. Whereas the people that succeed on YouTube, the ones our students who do really well, or the creators that I know who've succeeded on YouTube and any other business and any other content thing since the start of time, have always treated consistency as the fundamental bedrock, whereby you just have to keep on publishing videos every week. On top of that, the way I think it is I can overthink I can overthink all I would like, but I have to just keep on publishing the videos every week. And that means that overthinking and analysis is all well and good, but it's on top of consistent action, which means I'm never in the point, and I've done this occasionally and I've always kind of regretted doing this, but I don't want to be in the position where by over-analyzing, I actually stop doing the action, which is ultimately the thing that matters. Similarly, this sort of attitude has stopped me from taking my health seriously a lot, because I would always think that like, oh, I couldn't possibly start working out, I couldn't possibly start running, I couldn't possibly start eating healthily unless I had a completely firm plan and unless I knew exactly what I was doing and unless I read all the papers that showed the evidence base on XYZ. And I'd speak to friends who were into running and were into working out and stuff, and they'd be like, bro, just get started. Honestly, showing up and going to the gym somewhat consistently is the main thing for getting henge. All of the other stuff, fine, you can read about it, but if you don't show up to the gym regularly, it's just never going to happen for you. And so I try and kind of incorporate that whenever I'm worried about overthinking. Final concept that I find really helpful is something that my coach, Corey, introduced me to a few months ago, and I've been using it a lot since then. And that's the idea of the MBA, the Mental Board of Advisors. What is a Mental Board of Advisors? A Mental Board of Advisors is where you have people in your brain, people that you admire, living or dead. It might be creators, it might be authors, it might be entrepreneurs, it might be your parents, it might be people you look up to in some kind of way. And you imagine in your head like that's your mental board of advisors, and you ask them for advice on what you should do in a situation. So for me, my mental board of advisors are like Tim Ferriss and Cal Newport and Ryan Holiday. These are people who write books who I like their writing, basically. And generally, if I'm overthinking a situation, if I'm analyzing the hell out of something that I don't necessarily need to be, I think, all right, cool. Let's just mentally consult my mental board of advisors. What would Tim Ferriss say? What would Derek Sivers say? What would Cal Newport say? What would Ryan Holiday say? And it's like, that actually gives me a reasonable idea of what the reasonable plus EV response in the situation is. Obviously, my mental construction of these people is never really going to be able to predict the future, but that's not the point. The point is I just need to have a bias towards action rather than a bias towards anxiety and overthinking, which is kind of my default state. And that's really what combating overthinking in this sense is all about. It's all about replacing our bias towards thinking about stuff with a bias towards doing stuff, and recognize that if we are in the thinking camp more than most people, then chances are we just need to nudge ourselves more towards the action camp. And I've met very few people that are in the action camp who need to think harder about decisions. Most of the people that I meet, including me, we tend to struggle with this idea that we're over-analyzing things when really we should just be acting, because once we do the thing, then we get feedback and then we can improve and then we can iterate over time, but at least we're moving forward rather than staying static. Anyway, those were just some general thoughts on overthinking. Hopefully you found them somewhat helpful. If you like this, and then you might like to check out 5 strategies on how to beat procrastination, which is a similar chilled out video where I just kind of walk around here and talk about my thoughts on how I personally beat procrastination, which is another thing that I, like many of us, struggle with as well. So check out that video over there. Thank you so much for watching. Do hit the subscribe button if you aren't already, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Still recording, isn't he? What a snake.